Welcome to another episode of the Healthy Lifestyle Show. I am your host, Bonnie Iris, back with an incredible guest and a timely discussion. Chef Keith Snow, founder of Tasty Education and Harvest Eating, is joining us today to talk about long-term food storage. And what are the essentials when starting a long-term food storage pantry, and how to make the best of this fall harvest. So let's give a warm welcome to Chef Keith Snow. Hey Keith, it's so wonderful to have you on the Healthy Lifestyle Show. Thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be with you.
Awesome. Yeah, fall is almost here, so I am getting excited for the leaves to start turning orange and red and yellow. And so it's great to have you here with Harvest Eating. Can you tell us a bit about yourself and your healthy lifestyle journey?
Sure. That's it's always fun to reminisce about where things have how I've arrived at this point, I guess. Well, Harvest Eating is something that before I tell you about it, I was a chef for about 25 years, finally winding up as the executive chef of a major ski resort in Colorado. And when we were up at 9,800 feet, we had our first daughter, Olivia. That was in 2002. And, you really, you don't plan for it when you're a parent, at least immediately, what type of, how you're going to feed your children. Are you going to be the healthy lifestyle parents or the junk food parents or the, who knows what parents? But I know when my daughter was, 3 or 4 months old, my wife and I kind of had this moment where we thought, do we want to just do what other people are doing with bottled baby food and formula, or are we going to, stay going with, breastfeeding and making baby food? And that's the way that we decided to go, is we investigated all types of healthy ways to raise children, making baby food. And my wife was super diligent in preparing all types of foods for our daughter. And we'd be out at places, and my wife would have these little frozen cubes of, peas and other potatoes, sweet potatoes, mashed up vegetables. And folks would ask a lot of questions about what it was. And that was kind of the beginning of going into sort of the healthy style of cooking and eating. As a chef for those decades, I cooked mainly rich, sort of fancier type of foods, some fine dining, a lot of ethnic food. And then at the ski resort, there was a mix of things with some fine dining. We had, après ski, we had banquets. It was all over the board. But that was my first foray into sort of what I'll call healthy eating. And after a couple of years, we wound up on a farm in North Carolina. And I had spent a lot of time around farms as a kid because my uncles had dairy farms and horse farms in New York State and Pennsylvania. So I can remember the smell of the hay in the barn and the animals and the tractors, and that whole thing really enticed me. So that was kind of one of the main reasons I purchased land, and we built a farm from the ground up, a barn, and we had horses and goats and gardens.
Wow.
And we did all that stuff. And during that time, I kind of ventured out of the kitchen and started a journey into culinary media, and was doing television shows, and we did a pilot for the Food Network and wound up filming cable TV. And during that time, I started this Harvest Eating website, and this was before there was 80 zillion other food blogs. So I had a pretty good head start, and I was putting videos on YouTube within a couple of months of YouTube coming into existence. So that part of it, the timing was good, and I started really reaching a lot of people. And at the farm, we were developing, this was before local foods were anything anybody talked about. Back then it was low carb Atkins diet. And it's funny, it seems to have come full circle to that again. But we were developing all these contacts with local farmers, and drinking raw dairy and milking goats and all this kind of stuff. And so Harvest Eating was about seasonal cooking, all four seasons, different foods coming to season. You mentioned at the start of the show here about the fall, which is one of my favorite times for culinary
Mm.
because there's so many great things that came in. But, my journey in media just kept going. I wound up being approached by a publisher, and in 2009, the Harvest Eating Cookbook was released, and I went out on a tour promoting that all over the place, including internationally. And the book was a great selling book. We sold every single copy that was printed. I think there's some that you can find out on Amazon. And those of you that are listening that are interested in the cookbook, it's a hardcover book. It's about 302 pages, 200 recipes. It's a really nice book. And you can get a used copy on Amazon, sometimes for as little as $5.
Wow.
And they're still, still perfectly readable. But the cookbook came out in 2009, and that was an interesting time because it was right after the financial collapse of 2008.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know then, but the experiences that I was having at that point would kind of lead me to where I am now with my course called Food Storage Feast, which is about cooking, from your pantry and building up a pantry filled with foods in case of, emergency, job loss, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
But back in 2009, I was traveling a lot promoting my cookbook. And there were a couple of different things that happened. One of them was we had a freezer out in our garage, and it was filled with, I don't know, $400 or $500 worth of grass-fed pork and beef from a local farm. And a circuit went out in the garage, and we lost the entire thing. So all of it rotted. I mean, it was horrific, the smell. And we were like, what is that smell? And we opened up the freezer, and we knew immediately what it was. So my wife, being the diligent one that she is, she volunteered to clean it all out. I wanted to put duct tape on it and call somebody to haul it off and throw it in the junkyard. But
Yeah.
we realized how important it is to have food stored. And then when I was out traveling promoting my book, I'd be in New York one day, I'd be California, Florida, wherever I was. My family would be home alone. And I thought, what happens if there's another banking collapse, or what happens if we lose all the food in the freezer again? What are they going to eat? And we never really, we had plenty of food, more food than the average family, but we certainly didn't do anything with, long-term storage pantries.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you focus on?
Yeah, I like to have kind of like my staple foods in my pantry. That way I don't have to go to the grocery store as often, and just kind of stock up on. I remember traveling in Australia. It's funny. I was traveling in a van, so we didn't have a fridge or anything. So what we did was we just grabbed a bunch of canned food. But anytime we go to the grocery store, we called it, we're bunkering up, we're getting all our bunker foods for the trip until the next time we can make it to the grocery store, so it's kind of funny. That reminded me of that. Can you share some of the best ways to get your fall harvest in, and how you can go about preparing for the fall and the winter?
Sure. Well, I can distinctly remember when we were on the farm, trying to put the harvest eating sort of, mantra into practice. We would always take the kids to different farms, different times of the year when foods were ready, whether it be, strawberries in the spring or peaches in the summer, and then apples, you name it. We would do all that. And I can distinctly remember at least the first few years on the farm, we would go and find these apple varieties, and we would buy bushels of these apples, and we would store them in the coldest place that we could find. And we would buy varieties that were, known to be storage apples. And we would have a lot of them fresh, but then we would also do a ton of canning, late season tomatoes, because we would get tomatoes right into early October in North Carolina.
Wow.
So tomatoes, and then we would make batches of pickles. We would do dried apples. We would do applesauce, late season green beans, all types of food like that. And then, of course, I would buy lots of hard winter squash. And I
Mm-hmm.
always had a small farmer locally that had, heirloom varieties of squash. And some of these would be, I mean, when I say that they're hard to cut, I mean, these things are, really rock hard, and that is very good for long-term storage. So they would last a long time. I mean, we'd be eating squash that we picked up, in the first week of or second week of October, something like that. We'd be eating that the following spring, and it
Wow.
was still,
Like
perfect.
spaghetti squashes and like butternut
Yeah,
squash?
spaghetti squashes and other heirloom. Um, you know, I'm trying to think of some of the names. They all have funny names, but
Yeah. Or
um,
acorn squash.
buttercup squash. I mean, I think it's called. There's one that's like an orangey red. It's
Mm.
I can't remember the name, but that was one in particular that was tremendous for long-term storage because it was so hard, and you didn't really need to do anything special to those. And that's, these are things that people did years ago, is growing those type of and just planting the garden. That way, these things are coming out at the time that you need them,
Mm-hmm.
and you have food for many months even without any refrigeration. So it's pretty neat stuff.
Yeah, that's important too. And like you said, even just with the garden, being aware of what you're planting for the different seasons, like the spring, what can be replanted before like the fall comes too. That's
Yeah, like
that's
I'm
good.
actually, I just did a quick search. Of course, butternut squash, acorn squash, delicata squash. We had Hubbard squash. Oh, there's the one that my favorite was, this kabocha squash. It was really delicious. And
Never
then
heard of that.
curry. There's one called red curry, KUR,
Ooh,
and
sounds
that
like something I should put in my curry tonight.
yeah, no, it's great for that, but that was a really nice, long-lasting one. And so I would always be developing recipes to use surrounding these topics and these different crops. So that was something that I did for a number of years, and I've shared literally hundreds of videos out on YouTube and through my podcast, which is the Harvest Eating Podcast. Just, I mean, countless recipes and things through the years to help people cook with seasonal food. It was only, in the last couple of years that I really started to get into more of the, I mean, I still do all that. We were just literally at a farmer's market the other day, and we're planning a trip hopefully later this week to a berry farm. It's about
Mm.
6,000 feet, and they still have raspberries, which is
Whoa.
going to be fun. But I got into the more long-term storable foods, within the last few years. And that's something that it's a whole new way of thinking about things.
Mm-hmm. So with long term, are you talking about like canning food as well, or just like food that's good for long term storage, like the squash?
Well, those would be, canning, and then, apples and squash, things that would just last a couple of months. That's something that we do as much as we can. But when you're thinking about really long term stuff, putting rice in Mylar bags and buckets, wheat and whole oats and cornmeal,
Mm-hmm.
dry milk, sugar, salt, all these things. We have we have several large pantries, and they're just stocked with all kinds of food like that. Hard wheat, just I probably have 300 or 400 pounds of rice.
Wow.
Yeah, in the house, and that stuff can last, decades. And
Yeah.
then we also have a ton of freeze dried and dehydrated foods, mostly freeze dried. And I work with a company in Utah in a recipe development type role. So I create videos and recipes using some freeze dried food. Not, it's not strictly freeze dried. I use other pantry items.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is to learn to build up a pantry like that. I think of it as edible insurance because, a lot of people out on the internet talk about, quote unquote preppers and, you know, disaster food and all that. And some of these folks go a little crazy with, the zombies are going to come out, and, the electrical grid's going to blow up. And I'm sure all that stuff might be, might be possible, but I think
Maybe,
the things
yeah.
that are more, every day is going to be, I mean, look what, right now we're talking on September 11th, and Hurricane Irma just got
Yeah.
done wrecking Florida. And then we had Harvey before that. And we talked before we started recording, there's people in Montana where we used to live that are just having a heck of a time with fires and smoke and all that.
Yeah.
if you build a long-term storage pantry, it's like edible insurance. And job loss, that's something that happens to people all the time. I
Mm-hmm.
know so many folks that have such slim pickings in their pantry. I mean, a couple of days worth of food and they're just out. I talked to a friend of mine in Florida, and he's the first one I think about when I mention that. And I said, "So are you ready for Irma?" And they were hunkering down; they weren't evacuating. And he said, "Yeah, we have some food, water, candles, and batteries."
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, but if your power's out for a long time, how are you going to cook? Now, the other day I was
Yeah.
up in Salt Lake City this past Friday and Saturday, and the state of Utah had invited me in to give a few demonstrations. And I had this little camping stove. It runs on butane. You can get it. Everybody should have one of these things. You could get it at Walmart for about
Mm-hmm.
$20, and you put in a little butane can, and it's like having a portable burner, and it
Mm-hmm.
works extremely well. And I was cooking all kinds of dishes, using freeze dried food, just a few shelf stable items from the pantry, and that could be ethnic foods as well, like salsa and soy sauce and fish
Mm-hmm.
sauce and coconut milk, which I keep all of those things in there. And that's designed to take these long-term storable foods that generally are bland by nature. I mean, rice, beans, corn, oats, wheat. These things need to be, worked into some recipes with some flavorings to make them taste good. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot that can be done if you put your mind to it.
Yeah, and you can really transform a dish just with spices, or like you said, like coconut milk or something simple with your rice and a certain spice like cumin or turmeric, and you can transform it into Indian dish.
No,
Yeah.
you're exactly right. And that's one of the things that I showed. I mean, it's kind of funny which recipes stand out. In the Course Food Storage Feast, we have just dozens and dozens of videos and recipes for cooking with this kind of thing. But the Caribbean rice and beans has become
Mm-hmm.
a favorite. Everyone that takes the course seems to comment on that. And that's one of the dishes that I did in front of, I don't know, about 100 people up in
Mm-hmm.
Salt Lake City. And a can of coconut milk, and you mentioned cumin, just a few different dried spices, and you can have black beans that are just amazing.
Yeah.
And the coconut really lends a great amount of fat. And when you're talking about commodity type foods, these carbohydrates and long-term storage, getting fat is difficult in the
Mm.
diet because dairy and butter and cheese and all those things are highly perishable. But
Right.
you can get versions of them that are like a powdered butter that works really well. Same thing with sour cream, or canned coconut milk and coconut oil, and these things last for almost forever in your pantry.
Yeah.
So
No,
it's just been
absolutely.
for me it's been a challenge because coming from a background of fancier type cooking and French sauces and that kind of cooking with these foods has been it's kind of re-energized my creativity, because I make a lot of recipes with these foods now, and it takes a little bit of magic to make it all taste good. So I find it very fun.
Yeah, especially because like if you're cooking like gourmet dishes in the sense of like maybe what you used to cook, you need to buy specific ingredients for just one meal where that isn't really plausible or makes sense in when you are creating a bunker or edible insurance in your house, right?
No, definitely. That's a good
Yeah.
point.
I had a question about like beans and lentils because like it's so easy to buy like the canned beans and lentils, but do you find there's a big savings with buying like the dried beans and then boiling them? I know it just takes a quite a bit of time just to even cook and prepare beans. So I was just wondering what your take was on that.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, and astute to think about it, because there is a huge difference between dried beans and canned beans. Now, I am a very big advocate on keeping canned beans. You can get them if you're somebody that looks for coupons or shops at club stores like Costco and places like that.
Mm-hmm.
They're not budget breakers. So you can buy cases of different types of beans. Now we keep a lot of black beans on hand, and we buy them in either cases of 6 or 12 from club stores. So we'll keep, literally dozens of those in the pantry. And same thing with red beans and white beans,
Mm-hmm.
because those, not only do they not require any time, but they don't require any energy. And that's
Right.
something when you're, if you're talking about an emergency situation, like, I mean, we were sitting here last night and it wasn't an emergency, but we were sitting here and all of a sudden the power went out for no reason.
What?
It was out for about 30 minutes. We went and got flashlights and it came back on. But, we're talking about these people that, let's just say you just went through Hurricane Irma. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have any power. The last thing you want to do is have to take out your dry beans and cook them for 3.5 hours, because you're using up precious energy, like butane cans or propane, whatever the source of your emergency cooking situation is. You don't want to be cooking that long. So that's where, on the emergency side of things, having the canned, because I
Mm-hmm.
can make a pot of black beans start to finish literally in 12 minutes or less. I mean, basically
Right.
bringing it up to a boil and adding some of the dried herbs and seasonings, whatever, to it. Now, on the money saving side, it's definitely way cheaper to buy them dried.
Mm.
And I do store these in buckets. Now, beans, they store, a lot of people will claim, I mean, they're not going to go bad where they're, you open them up 18 years from now, you're not going to open up and say, oh, they've spoiled. They haven't spoiled, but they do become more difficult to cook, sometimes downright impossible, because
Mm.
there's a certain thing in a bean that allows it to, a little hole in it. I forget what it's called, but it allows it to soften up a bit when it's being cooked. And the longer they're stored, the more difficult and longer it takes to cook them. So I would say, a 10-year lifespan is what I like to shoot for with dried beans, but they do cook up better. I keep a lot of lentils. I keep different color lentils, green, black lentils. I keep different dried beans, just about every type of dried bean. And there's something special about a pot of beans, no matter what you do with it, when you take it from dry. It just seems to have a little better texture, and you can control the amount of sodium and
Mm-hmm.
things like that in them, where if you buy canned, sometimes that's difficult to control. So I do recommend keeping both.
Yeah, both. That way, if you are in emergency, you have the opportunity to just open a can, or you have the extra time you can put towards, then you can save money that way.
Yeah, and let's face it, if you have children and you work and you're busy, an emergency is often coming home at 6 o'clock and the kids are
Yeah.
starving and you don't know what to eat. So having
And
those canned beans and some of those foods that are a little easier to make is definitely an emergency preventer.
yeah, and time is money, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so with the fall harvest, are there like certain foods that we should be eating more of in the fall and winter type of months to make sure that we're getting proper nutrients and vitamins?
Sure. Well, I always like to eat in season as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And, I find family members that, it's December and they're having asparagus, and I'll yell at them because, yeah, you can get those asparagus from Argentina or wherever they come from. But oftentimes those things can be a little old and not as
Mm-hmm.
fresh as you would want. So I try to stay with the seasons as often as possible. And I think if if you live in a climate where you've got 4 seasons, your body almost tells you what you want. In the fall, you're going to want more, heartier foods,
Mm-hmm.
those squashes, winter greens, soups, chilies, stews, rice dishes, where when you get towards the summer, watermelon and lighter foods, salads, seafood, things like that are lighter, tend to go a little better. I mean, just think about, do you want to have a bowl of steaming hot chili, July 4th, or would you rather have a bowl of watermelon? And then think about the same question, January 15th. Most people
Yeah.
aren't eating watermelon January 15th. They want that steaming bowl of chili. So it does make a lot of sense. I think your body almost tells you what you should be eating. But, definitely I like to focus a lot on soups that have a lot of vegetables in them. And when I say a lot, I'm not talking about, just the mirepoix, celery, carrot, and onion. I mean, that goes in most soups, but what about putting beans in there? What about turnips? What about
Mm.
different squashes? Greens. I put a lot of greens, whether it be kale, collards, beet greens. I mean, you name it. I do watercress soups. I'll put in a lot of greens in soups, in rice, in stir fries. That way you're eating a lot of those, B vitamins and just those heartier foods. So soup is always a great place to stuff a lot of nutrients because we make an Italian white bean soup that has, has all your sort of flavoring ingredients like a celery, carrot, onion, garlic. But then I'll put butternut squash, I'll put turnip, I'll put a whole ton of kale in there and diced tomatoes, and in the end maybe even a little pasta, but sometimes
Mm.
I'll use even add lentils to it. But in the end you have something that's really hearty and it's got a lot of different colors in it and a lot of different vegetables, and my kids love that kind of stuff. I mean, I could feed that to them 5 nights a week. They never would turn it down. They love it.
Wow. And it's good for you. It has all the necessities, and I'm sure those type of soups are good to make like a large amount, and you could even freeze it for later.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was about to go when I make those. And my wife's always good at nudging me, like, make sure you make a whole pot's worth because, the kids they love that kind of food and they'll ask for soup as it gets colder quite a bit. So I'll try to make, 2.5 gallons of it at a time. And
Mm-hmm.
most times we'll just cool it off and put it right in the fridge and it'll be lunch and dinner the next day. But we have on occasion taken, food, good food storage stuff like little cups and just did it by servings, put a serving in there, put a cap on it and freeze it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always a great way to go as well because um, it's the hard part in something like those soups and stews and all that, the labors and all the chopping and cutting. And,
Yeah.
when you make a big batch of that, it's also, you have to season it properly and get it to taste really good. So it only makes sense just to make a little more when you're doing it.
Yeah, it's like double it or triple it or quadruple it if you're going to make the mess once. Just spend a bit of extra time chopping and you save a whole heap of time later on,
Yeah,
right?
it's always amazed me when people take out a pound of pasta and they'll reach in and they'll grab like a teeny bit of it and they'll cook that. I'm thinking you just boiled all that water, all that energy,
Mm-hmm.
cook the entire pound and use what you're going to use. The rest of it goes in a zip bag with a little teaspoon of olive oil, just shake it around and put it in the fridge. I mean, it'll last 3 days in the fridge anyway. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just yesterday, my 8-year-old son was sitting here with a bowl of noodles, just eating the whole bowl. He didn't even put anything on them. So that's the quickest meal in existence. A little, sauce or even some good butter and a grating of Parmigiano Reggiano on some cooked
Yeah.
noodles, and you have a meal.
Yeah. Easy, right? So what are we talked about like preserving foods, but some foods have like a smaller shelf life, like greens, like kale and whatnot. Are there certain ways to help make those shelf life longer in the fridge?
Well, I mean, those we keep quite a bit of fresh produce on hand, and all of it will have. I mean, it doesn't last that long just because of the nature of it being fresh. But
Right.
I will do things to it. Like sometimes if I get, the other day I was at the store and they had this gorgeous Italian kale. It was organic and it's on sale. So I'll buy 3 or 4. And it's funny, as kale kale became more popular a few years ago, they couldn't give this stuff away, but now you go in there, you'll pay $4 for 3 long leaves of it. But
Whoa.
when it's on sale and looks really good, I'll buy a bunch of it
Mm-hmm.
and I'll chop it up and I will saute, I'll mince up some onion and garlic and olive oil, sweat that out, and then I'll put in the washed and chopped up kale and I'll cook it with a little bit of chicken broth and then cool it off. And sometimes I'll freeze that.
Mm-hmm.
Then that is because it's just not very dense, it's super easy to defrost. But then I'll keep it in the fridge cooked, and that extends the shelf life, probably to 5 or 6 days, and then I'll use it in different dishes. Like, let's just say you want to take some linguine. You can cook a little linguine and then just take a pan with some olive oil, throw in a little garlic, maybe, since we're talking about the fall, a diced up butternut squash. Put it in the
Mm-hmm.
pan and cook it until it starts to get some caramelization, maybe a tiny bit of cream, a few handfuls of the pre-cooked kale, some cheese, mix it all together, and you've got a really nice pasta dish. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll do things like that. Also, I make a lot of stir fries. So having cooked greens on hand goes tremendous. Sometimes I'll just do a little bit sesame oil and soy sauce and turn that into just like a Asian style kale and maybe put that underneath a piece of grilled fish or grilled chicken. So there's
Mm-hmm.
always ways to use it. The idea is to, cook a little bit in advance. That way you can save some time in the kitchen later.
Mm-hmm. I like that. And also, you can always throw some things in the freezer and use it in like smoothies or something. Sometimes when my spinach is going almost like it's going to go bad soon, I throw it in the freezer and just put it in my smoothies sometimes.
Yeah. Who doesn't like, that's one of my favorite things is, icy, freezing cold bananas with kale and a little water and maybe some raspberries all done up in the Vitamix. I absolutely love.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
haven't actually made one in a while, and I've been it's funny because I've been craving it. I saw something on the internet recently, and I'm like, I got to get that blender. It's sitting right on
Yeah.
the counter.
It's
We've got a
time.
whole batch of frozen bananas. So
Oh, wow. You
yeah.
know what I've been doing with frozen bananas?
Well,
I've been making I call it nice cream. It's like vegan ice cream. So it's just frozen bananas blended up with coconut milk, and you can do any other frozen fruit, and it's just like a nice take on ice cream. And you can just like eat it right there. It's you don't have to refreeze it if your fruit is already frozen. And
yeah, I
it's
think we've made that before using. We've got an Omega juicer, a horizontal juicer. So
mm,
we'll do that, and we'll there's a little attachment or something, but it comes out the end of it, and it is really neat texture.
mm-hmm,
Like a little banana sorbet, which is lovely. And particularly if you have the really ripe bananas before you freeze them, you make sure that the skins are almost black. Those are tremendous like that.
mm-hmm.
I need to try it with some coconut milk because that sounds really lovely.
Yeah, it is really nice. I had some last night actually. Yeah, so what are some things to avoid in like meal planning, more so on a budget, or in like the times where you're trying to save money, I guess, as well?
Well, that's one of the reasons that I wrote the course Food Storage Feast is,
Okay.
um, first of all, a lot of people store food, and in my capacity as I'm one of the expert chefs on a podcast called the Survival Podcast, which talks about everything from Bitcoin to guns to food storage to gardening to permaculture. I mean, the topics on there are very wide ranging, and I've been doing that, guest segments on that show since about 2011. And there's a lot of people that store food, particularly just because of financial emergency or job loss. They just want that edible insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And what was happening is through the years, people would contact me is, yeah, I've got all this rice in here, I've got all this wheat or oats, and how the heck do I really use it? Because it's just sitting in the closet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, I'm doing the same thing. I've got all these foods that I store, but they're just kind of off in the room by themselves and we don't really use them.
Yeah.
So back in April of 2016, and this goes to what not to do, particularly when you're trying to save money, and we're a little different because I usually have clients that I'm testing recipes for, or, just things that I'm doing videos on YouTube or on my podcast. So my grocery budget is probably double what the normal family might do, sometimes as much as $2,000 a month. And that's
Whoa.
very unusual. But I said to myself, I need to figure out how to help people, because I keep getting all these emails that want to save money and they want to start using some of their food storage. So I told my wife and my kids, I'm not going to the store, and because I would go and I love seasonal cooking. So I'd go, what looks good in the market? Okay, I could pair that with what kind of meat or whatever. So I'd go and I'd be going to the store all the time and buying, more expensive type foods. So I stopped all that and I just started cooking with these very basic commodity foods: rice,
Mm-hmm.
beans, wheat, oats, corn. You'd be amazed what you can do with these things. So over the course of the month, I was trying to make breakfast, lunch, and dinner out of this long-term storage pantry, but combined with the everyday pantry. And that's the magic, is people that store food want to just take it and cook with it. But by the nature of those foods being bland and just kind of empty sort of carbohydrates, you need to make them taste good. And one of the things that I've done is helped people look to ethnic cultures, because if you think about it, around the globe, there are ethnic cultures: Southeast Asia, Italy, Russia, no matter where you go, Mexico, Latin America,
Mm-hmm.
Spain, where these staple foods, these carbohydrate foods, be it rice, beans, pasta, you name it, wheat. In the Middle East, they eat a lot of wheat. All these things this is the foundation of the diet. And then they add in their spices and sauces and seasonings to make it something special. Who would have thought? Italians laugh when they see dopey Americans paying $20 for a bowl of risotto in a restaurant, because this is a peasant dish. And it's the same thing with rice and all these type of foods where, paella, you pay through the nose for that kind of stuff. So my suggestion to people is, instead of going to the store and buying all these fresh foods, try and practice with your long-term storable stuff. Now, rice, for existence, in my course, some of the dishes that I've done, like I do a wild mushroom risotto, and that uses dried porcini mushrooms, which can last for years in the pantry. I also do a green rice and a Mexican red rice. So focusing on these things and practicing cooking with them, rice casseroles, and then tons of things with pasta, potatoes, dried potato flakes are amazing.
Mm.
Now, I'll be very honest, as a chef that's cooked in some pretty fancy places, I just thought that was for, I don't know, I would never eat it. I never bought
Yeah.
potato flakes, but now it's one of my favorite things to cook with, because if you really kind of focus on it, there's a lot of things that can be done with it, and it's super easy and very inexpensive. And Dave Ramsey, I'm sure you've heard of him. He helps people get out of debt. And he always talks about, you need to eat rice and beans and rice, and stay out of the restaurants. And the same thing is, stay out of the grocery store every single day, and definitely
Yeah.
stay out of the fast food lane, and focus on long-term foods, because you can save a boatload,
Mm-hmm.
and your cooking will improve. Your family will love it. It's just that simple. And I
Mm-hmm.
found about a 60% reduction in my grocery bill over the course of a month. And through that month, I've developed a bunch of recipes that wound up in the course. So that would be a huge suggestion, especially for people that are looking to save money. You can save a car payment without even batting an eye by doing this.
Yeah. And it's definitely something I've kind of been experimenting to see how long you can go without going to the grocery store, because it really tests your creativity as well, because you're gonna wind up with some ingredients left in your fridge or your pantry that you're not used to cooking together, right? And you're like, okay, what can I make with this? So makes it a fun little challenge, that's for sure.
No, I agree.
Mm-hmm. So, with that being said, Keith, I know you kind of just made an awesome challenge or tip for the Healthy Lifestyle Challenge. We always end our podcast with a Healthy Lifestyle Challenge or tip. Do you have one for them this week, or you can use the same one, or whatever you
Absolutely.
like?
One of the things that I see people doing, and it's such an easy way to improve your health, is to try and avoid sugar, and also, read labels. People sometimes pick up foods, and like if you go into your supermarket, a lot of times they'll have prepared foods in the supermarket,
Mm-hmm.
and they, you would just think that, they just made it over there in the deli. And,
Yeah.
maybe it's chicken salad, they just made it over there in deli, and you don't even look. But if you turn that little package over, more often than not, that was made somewhere else, and there's 65 ingredients in there.
Mm.
And the last 15 of them, are food science things like preservatives and additives. So reading labels is super important, but also watching added sugar. And you can really save sugar by avoiding drinks. Now, people are in Starbucks all the time, drinking these, sugar drinks, frappuccinos and all those type of things. Focus on coffee and espresso, and try not to, we don't buy any beverages in our house. We drink, I drink coffee, but the kids will drink milk. Most often of the times it's raw, or water. And that's what we
Mm-hmm.
drink. When you cut the amount of sugar that people are drinking and eating out of your diet, your health is going to improve. There's no way around it. You will lose weight. Your body is not having to send floods of insulin all the time dealing with all this sugar.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's one thing I always tell, because people ask me all the time, what can I do to, I don't have any energy, or I feel kind of tired. And I say, you need to drink water, number one, and maybe a little bit of milk and tea and coffee, but you need to avoid things like orange juice. Now, people somehow still think that orange juice in a carton is healthy. That is just a sugar bomb.
Yeah.
If you want to squeeze the oranges, that's another story. Or make your own apple cider. Things like that are great, but cutting down sugar is a huge thing that a lot of people can do easily.
Mm-hmm. That's actually funny that you mentioned that, because I am participating in Sugar-Free September, and so I am avoiding all the sugar added into recipes. Of course, I allow like natural sugar, like from bananas and whatnot, but I have been actively looking and reading labels, and it is quite astonishing how much sugar is added into so many different things, like crackers and just a lot of like boxed food, that's for sure too. So
And I know a couple people that are type 2 diabetic, and if they drink, let's just say, a 4-ounce glass of orange juice out of the carton, their blood sugar will go through the roof. But if they squeeze orange juice fresh, they have nothing. And
yeah.
that is just interesting how a product, something that's not processed like that in its raw and natural form, it's orange juice is not orange juice. And I try
Mm-hmm.
to keep foods as close to the ground as possible when cooking. And that's just a good way to go about it.
Yeah. So, yes, and when you are craving something sweet, maybe reach for a date or something. Yeah, because I know
Yeah,
sometimes it's
it's
hard.
funny. Dates are super sugary and
They
lovely.
are.
I make a smoothie where I'll put a banana, about 4 dates, almond milk, and ice in the blender.
Yeah.
I'll blend that up, and
Oh,
that is just magic. I mean, it's super sweet and delicious. But another thing I've been doing recently is going to the store and buying frozen raspberries, organic raspberries, and I take those out, and I love those things. I mean, I could eat a half a bag of them, and they have a lot of fiber. There's not many carbohydrates in them. They're sweet. So that's another tip for people.
great. I love it. Those are great tips. And I think, yeah, it's something we should be more aware of when we're shopping and in our daily diet too. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Keith, for joining us on the Healthy Lifestyle Show today, and talking to us about the fall harvest and about your harvest eating cookbook and everything. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and I wanted to leave your listeners with this. If anybody is serious about learning to cook from a long-term pantry, if they want to visit my website, foodstoragefeast.com, I've created a coupon for your listeners, and the coupon code is HLP for Healthy Living Podcast. And if they decide to become a student of ours, they put in HLP, they'll save 15%, and that's a significant discount. So hopefully some of them will take advantage of it. And I appreciate you having me on today, Bonnie.
Yeah, wonderful. That's an awesome gift. And thank you so much again. And have a wonderful day.
You do the same thing. Thanks so much.
A huge thanks for Keith for all those tips on starting and creating a long-term food storage. It is so great to know and understand how simple it can be to make gourmet meals in emergency times or on a budget. Learn more about creating a long-term pantry at foodstoragefeast.com and use the promo code HLP for 15% off his courses. And a quick recap on the Healthy Lifestyle Challenge: cut all processed sugars out of your diet. Join me on Sugar-Free September. It's not too late. If you are craving something sweet, have a banana or some dates. And of course, remember to check out Healthy Lifestyle Meals. It's an incredible meal planning app that saves you time and money. Plan meals for the entire week in less than 15 minutes. Start your trial today at healthylifestylepodcast.com/trial. And until next week, stay well, stay active, and be happy. Welcome to another